Hey friends, welcome back to the Bald Booktuber. We are live with my good friend and author of the Sun Saga, Christopher Ruocchio. He is here to explain what I found to be a very confusing book, perhaps more confusing than any of the other three combined. But I am excited to get to hear his insights on this, and we have a few things we're going to discuss. So if you are here live, thank you. If you're watching this later, that is also awesome. But I guess I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate Christopher on soon to be a father in the very, very near future, and a very, very successful Kickstarter that I am excited to have gotten in at the ground floor on. So I can't wait to get my copy of the lettered version.
Yeah, man. No, thanks for getting one of the letters too. No, thank you. That went way, way better than I could have ever hoped or expected it to. So if anyone watching was in on the Kickstarter, thank you. It was awesome. Steve and I are thrilled. So
yeah,
glad to be here too. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah,
we've made it to the official end, at least.
we
There's
did
the
it.
unofficial end, one more book, but we're gonna get there. So
You are the main reason I have gotten through it, so I appreciate that. I remember initially I'm like, I'm not smart enough for this, and probably still the case, but I feel like I've gotten a lot more out of this read from my discussions with you, as well as some of the ancillary materials and videos and stuff I've watched.
well, I'm
So
glad I could help. This series, and I've said this like every episode, right? There really isn't another science fiction series like it in terms of like sheer like depth and complexity and interrelatedness. I think I've said probably every video we've done that
yeah,
like one of the definitions I think of a perfect book is a book that doesn't have any wasted words in it. And to do that for 4 books in a row in one big series, I think is really an achievement. I think you'd be really hard pressed to remove so much as a spare adverb from Book of the New Sun without damaging it in some way.
yeah.
Um, we must begin, any of these discussions by saying, that this is the gene is just the best of us. So, writers, I mean, and so yeah, no, I mean, like it is also like this book does all the heavy lifting, really, in the sense that it's where everything comes together, right? Endings are really tricky because you have to really pay everything off in the last book. That's something I have anxiety about going into
Yeah,
book 7. Because of that, a lot of things sort of have to get wrapped up. They have to get sort of brought in, and they have to be made as clear as Gene is going to make them, which is not necessarily very clear, and which of course is by design. But because of that, I think this book is harder in a lot of ways, certainly than the last one. I think Sword is pretty easy.
yeah,
Citadel, not so much.
right.
The first time I read it, I was kind of let down by this one because I liked the 2 middle books so much, and the ending, like this one's a little bit more fragmented is maybe the right word. Like it has a lot more distinct episodes than or really like distinct tones, I think, because the story section in the beginning has a feel, and then the war section has a feel, and then the post-war section has a feel, and then there's like some wandering around on his way at the end and wrapping things up, and they all sort of feel like different books in a very distinct way, in a way that Sword feels like a bunch of episodes, but they feel sort of tonally the same. They're all about Severian wandering. Each episode in Citadel is sort of its own beast, I think, which makes it, I think, a harder book to get into.
I loved it. It took me a lot longer to read this one for whatever reason than the others. Because the others, I felt like I was myself, my pacing, I was like, kind of speed running through them, as it were. But this one, I would read a couple chapters and then I would felt like I had to stop and kind of contemplate what was going on. And then it would take a while before I could get back into it. So, this was supposed to be done like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I just didn't have it done yet. So
yeah, sure. No, it's. I think it is just demonstrably. Demonstrably is not the right word. It is certainly harder than I think the other 3. And again, I think that's because it's the one where like everything kind of has to come around. And Gene doesn't ever sit down when there's a reveal really and say, this is the reveal. The reveal happens, and you have to figure out what the reveal is. There's the scene with the claw and the thorn bush, and there's a relationship between that scene and the sand garden scene in the first book and all this stuff, and he never really comes out and is like, look, like 1 = 1 here.
Sure.
You kind of have to still read the paragraphs and go like, wait a minute. And that's that is one of the ways I think that he's set apart from a lot of other writers, is he not only shows instead of tells, but like he doesn't even tell you that he's showing you.
Right. And this one had some like interesting touch points back to previous books, like which all series obviously do, but I think there was the point where he was talking to, I think it was the slave to the Pellerines had actually witnessed his duel, didn't know that it was him that was in the duel, but it talked about the duel in length, about the two guys fighting with bushes or whatever those things are. Like that kind of stuff is cool, because you're like, I don't remember if it was the slave or this was a different conversation, but somebody basically recounted back to him the duel he had been in Shadow of the Torturer, which was really cool.
Yeah. No, I think that was the slave of the Pellerines. This is the same guy, I think, who talks about, this is the guy who talks about having been whipped by Master Palimon, right? Which is another way in which the story sort of comes full circle, right? Because we have these hints. Sorry, my computer just blacked out.
Oh, you're still with us.
Yeah, no, I was afraid I'd lost you there. I think my monitor just went to sleep, which is strange. But in any case, so there's another way that this sort of comes full circle. We have these intimations that like Palimon kind of went on a quest similar to Severian's earlier in his life, and this idea of things sort of cycling and repeating is very deeply thematic, let's say. So it's a smaller way in which the bigger sort of cyclical nature of things is repeated across the series. So
well, I had a couple things I wanted to talk about and have clarified. So let's get into a couple of them. So from the start, we have Severian reviving this dead soldier, and so he basically tells the guy, I'm two people. I'm myself and I'm Thekla, and you're two people. You're yourself and you're Jonas, my friend Jonas. So what did you take out of that? I know we've talked a little bit about it offline, but I'm just curious what your overall thoughts on that scene were.
Yeah, so this is one of those things, actually. So we're starting off like, kind of weak here, because I don't know that I have a full grasp of this either. Right?
Sure.
This is one of those things, like, I usually read through it and I'm like, nah, I don't know what to do with this, and then I move on, right? What I think is happening is I think Severian used his recall powers, right, to bring back some piece of Jonas through this other person as like a medium, right? And so it's in a sense like Jonas's spirit that has been resurrected in some way because he was lonely, wanted his friend, or something like that. It is possible there's more to it. Maybe this is going to be the guy that Jonas like cannibalizes to like save his robot self later on, because time, of course, not super linear. As Liam says, too metaphysical, just not compute. This one is this one I really struggle with. I think it's more like that first thing. I think what he is doing is recalling some piece of Jonas from the past, but since what Severian does, right, is sort of run things back through like time that are present, right? He can recall, he brings Dorcas back from the dead, right, by touching her body, right, in the thing, but he does this by winding back through time, right? Yep. But I don't think there's any of Jonas around, so what I think he's doing is sort of winding back through his own memories of Jonas and is sort of pulling that into this other person. I'm not 100% sure. But it is the case that he can do this with his own memories to an extent, because when he talks about, his perfect memory, what he's actually doing is re-experiencing, his sensory experiences of the past with his sort of time powers, right? That's why, like, it's possible in book 2 for the Vodalarii to overtake him while he's hanging out in his hotel room, because he's so overcome by this memory, right? And he can't like move out of it because his his experience is so sort of totalizing, that he so he's like time looping his own memories basically, which is why he like his memory is kind of normal the rest of the time because he actually has a normal memory. He doesn't have a perfect memory. He is, I think, a normal memory and time powers that he works on his own brain sometimes. Is what I think is going on. And I think something like that is what happens with Miles and Jonas, right? But obviously it doesn't quite take because Miles goes on his own way. But I could be wrong, too. Like this is the thing, probably of all the stuff you had on your list that I am least confident in my understanding of.
So. That's certainly a better explanation than I could have ever pieced together. So I appreciate it.
I do like, we're excited here. I owe a lot of my understanding of this to the Owls of a Soup guys and to Mark Aramini. So I can't claim to have sat here and gone all the way through this without help. Reading Wolf generally, but reading these books particularly it's like a different kind of reading than just reading a book. Because what you'll do if you ever go reread this is you'll feel like a pro and like it will be much more fun. The first time through is like it's sort of like like I would read the Wikipedia articles of like horror movies before I go so that like I know like if something's gonna really bother me, like when I was a kid and stuff.
Yeah.
And like once you go in, you're like, oh, okay, like there's a scene coming up here where this like lady's gonna jump out. I know that's coming. And so I'm not going to worry about it too much, right? In the same way, you're like, okay, we're getting into this weird part with Miles. Like, I think I have kind of the grounding from the last time I read the book and from talking to people, right? I'm going to work a little bit harder next time. It's sort of, there's a meme in which people, compare everything to the video game Dark Souls, right? Where the point is like you die, and by dying, you learn how to beat the level over. It's like playing Super Mario too. Super Mario is the Dark Souls of 2D platformers, right? Because you die and you're like, oh, I should have jumped there, right? There's a fish. Oh no. In the same way, you're like, oh, like this chapter is going to get real weird. Like I know that's coming, and you learn to read the book by rereading it, which is not true of most books, but it's one of the things that has made the series a cult classic is that it encourages this sort of deep long-term engagement. And so I'm not troubled by the fact that I don't really get this bit yet because I kind of read it through more times, but we'll get there. So
I love rereads, and I always say the best books are the ones that are the most rereadable and the ones that
totally
not about the reveals. It's about kind of what you learn along the way and how things tie together and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fine if you want to read like a mystery, but like if all the book has is whodunit, there's no point in coming back to it ever. And I think that books that you like want to keep in your life are better books, and that's why like the series displays Dune for me, right? It's like I'm pretty sure I understand Dune at this point, right? A lot of people are like, oh, Dune, so complicated. Like Dune, sure, it's complicated, but it's not this, right?
For sure.
It's not even close. So
yeah, I will definitely reread it probably multiple times, but I have a lot of other Wolf to get to first. I want to do long shorts, all kinds of other stuff first. So cool. Well, let's jump into the storytelling contest, which I loved. I am infamous, I guess, for loving stories within stories and liking to think about how they, connect to each other and stuff. So as much hatred as the book gets, Name of the Wind is one of my favorite books because of that story within a story type of nested doll syndrome that it has. And these were 4 fantastic stories. So we had the sealer, the seal hunter, and his story about his uncles, one of which murdered the other. We had the story of the uber-powered rooster that went on to fight an angel, which was super cool. And then we had the loyal to the 17th, the prisoner of war soldier dude from the other side. That I liked his because it had to be translated by Foila, which was awesome.
It was really cool.
Foila's story, which was sort of a wrapping up of the other 3, which was insane. So
right. Well, and then there was the meta story, right, about who's going to marry Foila, right, and it has this twist in it too, right, because she's like, I'm going to tell my own story actually, because it starts out, like, wait a minute, like she's just gonna abide by the by whoever wins the storytelling contest, right? And actually, no, right? She tells what I think is the best story of the bunch, personally.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's this sort of extra layer here, right, where there's a twist in the frame narrative. You know, it's unexpected, and of course, it all ends terribly when the camp is just wiped out and everyone's gone. After Severian goes to the next part of the story, so you know that's the real ending here is actually nobody. You know, which you know. You know, Wolf was in Korea, right? And so the sort of randomness and the futility of a lot of this stuff is like absolutely a part of the, you know, the experience, right? It's one of those parts of war I think that a lot of writers like sort of gloss over, right?
Sure.
Is like, well, they don't even do, most fantasy writers are not going to spend several chapters sitting in in triage, basically,
Sure.
you know, in mash. It's not going to happen. So it's cool that was there, you know, as in and of itself. But these stories are all they all give you, you know, in their little way, a wider sort of view of the world. You know, we get to see a little bit of the deep south, right, down in like what is probably Patagonia, you know, or even further. And like that's cool, right? Like, what does the world look like down there?
Yeah.
You know, we've got these sealers and like, you know, the glaciers are coming in down off, you know, Antarctica and all this stuff. Like it's
Right.
like a cool way to expand the setting at, you know, very little, like you don't have to go out of your way to do it, right? And then you know, we get a sense too of like the autochthons, right? The people who live up in the Pampas, with Foila's story. And we get obviously a look at the Askians, right, for the first time, and like what the Askians are, because they have been really on the fringes of the story the whole time, and we've never really been given a very close look at them. And now we know, right, they are a sort of super Orwellian, you know, like hyper Maoist society where speech is so politically correct you can only say bespoke sentences, right? You can only quote the approved text, basically.
Right.
And this is really cool. I read this and like there's no way that like this could possibly function actually, right? It's so cool. But like the fact that Foila translates everything is kind of, I think, what makes it work. Like I think that's where the trick is hidden. I don't
Yeah.
think that you could understand the story if you just had it told to you straight up. I
No,
just
absolutely not.
don't. You know, I don't know, but personally, but you know, which is why, you know, a lot of people have noted I do a very similar thing in Kingdoms
Lothians.
of Death,
Yeah.
and with the Lothrians, yes, and
Yeah.
that was totally an homage to this.
hmm
Uh, you know, although I'd had the idea earlier, then Gene beat me to it. There are several times in writing where I've had an idea, and this, I'm not the only one. I talk to writers all the time. They're like, "I had this great idea," and then it turned out like Brian Aldiss had done it in like 1970 something or whatever, you know. So I did it anyway, right? Which is like the only thing you can do, you know.
Yeah.
You know, if it turns out that you're reading a book and Gene Wolfe had the same idea as you know, like maybe you're on the right track, right?
hmm
But I wanted to like poke holes in it, you know, and sort of strain the system a little bit more because they couldn't, you know, there's no way to discuss like a novel concept or something. But the important thing, get back to this book, is, you know, that we get this look at the Askians in the first place, right?
Yeah.
We finally see like what is at stake on Earth, right? And that is, you know, like which way humanity, like what do you want to be?
Sure.
And you know, and so finally we understand, you know, what the Autarchs sort of fighting against, right? And we need to keep in mind too that these are the people who are thralls to Erebus and to Abaya, right? So these people, you know, this communist civilization is actually all composed of the slaves of this, you know, eldritch horror that has come from, you know, off world and lives in the oceans, right? What does Gene mean by this? I wonder. But you know, this too, you know, we in seeing the Askians, we like should keep in mind too that like a lot of the Commonwealth have already like gone over to them, right? Like all the nobility, and this gets wrapped up a little bit later when, you know,
Sure.
Votalus is brought in too. So, um, you know, this does a lot of like, the point is this does a lot of like setup actually for what's coming up next in terms of world
Yeah.
building and ground laying. Um, in addition to like even the rooster story, right, has things to do symbolically with the story of the Autarch, and his mission to try and bring the new sun. And so we get all this stuff sort of set up, kind of front loaded in this book, which is super cool. So
Yeah, I liked that two of the four stories involved an angel too. I thought that was a cool touch, and certainly intended, which I thought was a really nice feature. So
yeah, well, because the hierodules obviously are angels, right? To in a sense, right? But a pretty literal sense.
yeah,
And so that's reflected in these stories. And so the fact that like the folklore is reflecting in some way the sort of higher reality that Sumerian story is operating in is, I mean, that's what folklore does, right?
yep.
Folklore connects us to the deeper and the higher metaphysical truths of reality. And so these folk tales, I think, are really well written. And of course, I'm sure Liam's mentioned or will mention momentarily, right? That there's a bit of like Chanticleer in the story of the rooster as well. So like it's still connecting to older stories, older traditions, and recycling them in the same way that the stories were in books 2 and 3. So that's not gone by any means.
Yeah, I wanted to say hi to Matt, Fantasy Book Reviews. Thanks for dropping by, man. Check it out later when you've read it.
Yo, hey,
Yeah,
man.
Erebus and Abaya. Yeah, I would have liked to have seen more of them as well. They're kind of on the fringes throughout this book. And they mentioned is it Ariok, I think is the third one?
There's another one, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the only time Ariok gets mentioned.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it is partially the fact that they are, on the fringes that makes them as powerful as they are. Right, this is like Sauron, right?
Sure,
If Sauron is on stage twirling his mustache,
sure.
he is less effective a villain than if he, if he is this force on the fringes. Now we do learn more about them a bit in Earth of the New Sun.
Okay, cool.
So the thing to remember here is that Earth of the New Sun was not intended, but Earth of the New Sun's function basically is to make very obvious all the subtext in these 4 books. For Gene's Money, you only need to read the 4 books to really understand everything that's going on if you read closely.
Yeah,
I personally find the spelling out very cool because the subtext is very cool, right?
yeah.
Because Earth is going to be, about Severian going actually to bring the new sun. And so, we do in the process of this get a bit more on the great old ones, let's say. So,
Hey, Paramita, good to see you.
okay.
I did before we wrap up the story section. I did just want to read a quick passage out of the book, which really spoke to me. So it won't be but a minute. So
Yeah, go
uh,
for it.
I have no way of knowing whether you, who eventually will read this record, like stories or not. If you do not, no doubt you have turned these pages without attention. I confess that I love them. Indeed, it often seems to me that of all the good things in the world, the only ones humanity can claim for itself are stories and music. And that's just Wolf writing beautifully and speaking to us directly and knowing that we love stories and just uh, wrenching it in a little bit more. I'd love that passage.
Yeah, no, I think the next sentence is something like it's hard not to love best that which we give ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is so good, right? I frequently say, doing live streams and stuff, that really it's storytelling that separates us from the animals, right?
Mhm.
It's not tool use, it's not even really language. It's what we do
Sure.
with language. And so that's echoed here, right? In a very profound way.
Yeah.
This book, I think, probably ounce for ounce has the most quotable passages for me.
Hmm.
There's a bit towards the end about justice, and that with Master Palyman that I'm particularly fond of.
Yeah,
I should maybe try to go find that, but
for sure. Yeah, it's all kinds of really cool stuff. Yep, music and stories. Ranking of main characters, interesting. We've got Hadrian, then Atreides, and then Severian. Not that anybody asked.
yeah, Severian is hard to like. I think he's getting better. He's getting better. But by the end of the Earth of the New Sun, I rather like Severian. Who
Mhm.
is in the comments? Severian is here. I don't know if you saw.
I
but
saw
we are he knows
the
we're reading
namesake.
his
Yeah.
time warped manuscript. But yeah, no, I mean, the other thing too, right, is there's sort of a sort of back and forth too in these stories between like a very practical story in the case of the Sealer story and this more
Mhm.
fanciful like children's story, and they talk too about, I don't remember the specifics about like what the implication of these men choosing these stories to try and impress Foila was, but then
Mhm.
Group of 17 comes back with another like kind of it's more grounded story, right, in his setting and world, even though it's told in this sort of elevated way. And then
Right.
Foila also tells a fairy tale, which I think might to a certain degree indicate what her choice could have been, maybe if there had been more time, but maybe not. But each of these stories does do something thematically for the larger work, or at least in terms of these heavy lifting. So it's like super important that you pay attention to these. Particularly, I think the Rooster story is the
Mhm.
most important of the bunch, just because of its relationship to the story of the Autarch, which I think we'll get to here in a bit. So
Yeah, I really like the Rooster story, and apparently it echoes back to Aesop's Fables, which I've never read and should, and the Jacob wrestling with an angel in Genesis, which it's been 30 years I think since I've last read Genesis, which I need to do again. So been a while since I've done some Bible.
yeah,
So you
no,
get
me too. I joke I'm Catholic, right? So like they read it for me. So any Protestants in the audience will be quite upset with me now. I don't mean it. I don't mean it. It's just a joke. Um, but yeah, no. So there's totally some of that in there as well. Is that the story where it's Gabriel who
I think that's the intention. I don't know
um,
for sure, but I
There,
think that.
there is at one point Gabriel is mentioned by name, and what's interesting about Gabriel's appearance, and I think Alzabo Soup noted this too, is that Gabriel is described as having an axe, which I think is specifically a Oriental Orthodox, like Ethiopian depiction of Gabriel thing. So it's like a very obscure detail for Western audiences, but
Matt on
uh,
Books here. Hey, man, he is going through the series with Dr. Philip Chase and
oh,
Paul
cool.
Scholar, and they've got some great videos on Matt's channel as well. So you guys should check those out as well. I don't know how far he is, but I'm glad you're here, man. That's awesome.
Awesome.
Cool. And now we're going to get to the part where I'm going to make a lot of confused faces, and I'm going to look exactly like I looked when I was reading Howling Dark for the first time, which you obviously didn't see me reading the first time. So I will be very confused, and we'll get through it together. And hopefully, on the other side, I'll know what the hell's going on. So we're going to talk about basically the mission that the head Pellerine sets Severian on, which is to go talk to this anchorite as a hermit, and he's in this what is it, the last house or something like that.
Yes.
So I need help understanding who this guy is and what this last house is all about. So I'm
Okay, I
hoping
can do much better on this than I can with Miles. Okay, so
good. I'm glad.
the last house is kind of a TARDIS situation. Again, we're sort of back with the Botanic Gardens. Only it is from the future, right? It's from a different future because there are multiple parallel futures in play in this series, right? There's the Green Man's future in which the new sun does come again because, of course, there's
Yep.
enough sun to feed a plant person. But this is from a future where it does not, right? And the Hyrule help some of humanity escape from the destruction of Earth, and he has come back to watch the end, right? But also to travel back in time a little ways, right? And sort of observe things. So the house is a tower, right? It may be a rocket ship. I'm a little unclear on that.
Okay.
But the bottom of it, as you climb down the tower, you go back through time as well.
Yep.
So from the top of it, Master Ash is able to watch the the end of time on Earth. Basically, it's not the end of time in a sort of cosmic sense, but the end of Earth. And then as he descends through the house, he's able to access Severian's time, right? And so when Severian holds him away and is trying to save him from this war that will never reach him because they couldn't possibly find the house in the first place because you can't approach it directly because you have to approach it in a specific way to get through the time field, basically.
Okay.
But he goes to save this guy but in doing that, he pulls him away from his own time, right? He only exists in a future where certain things happen, and if he's bringing him back into this present, he's too much in flux, like Back to the Future style. He just like doesn't exist, so he like slowly fades away. So actually, I think this bit is mostly, I don't want to say straightforward, but I think this is much easier conceptually. Like once you understand, oh, like there's some weird time machine thing,
Mm-hmm.
and like he is a chrononaut basically, and he can't leave the time field basically in the ship without, he can go down to the bottom and like look out and see the war, be like, oh yeah, like things are going one way. But if he leaves, he's no longer really protected
I guess
anymore. So
a couple points of confusion. So, how does the Pellerine lady know to tell Severian to look for this dude, and why? I
that
guess
is
I'm
a super good question. I mean, I think on the surface, right? She like the why is easy, right? She thinks he's in danger, like she doesn't
okay.
understand everything, right? And she wants to get him out of the path of the war. As for how they like came into contact in the first place, that's a really good question.
Okay.
Now it's possible that I'm gonna totally speculate. I had to full
It's good.
disclosure, I have not read the book in like a year at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a minute. It's possible, right? The Pellerines serve the Conciliator. The Conciliator is a time warp Severian, right? There may be just some more time warpiness involved here. They like know that guy is there
Got it.
in some way, right? Because of this, maybe, right? It is also the case that he is from a future in which the Hyrule saved him and his ancestors, right? So they may the Hyrule certainly travel through time. So it's possible that some word got to
Okay.
um, got to the Pellerines in this way, so that they could tell Severian to go, because probably this whole episode is set up for his benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stuff that happens, as it becomes very clear towards the end of this book, is totally scripted.
Sure.
It has totally been, part of a plan for a long time to get this to happen, right? When we get to the Autarch, like that becomes like manifestly clear.
Yep.
Right. And so it's possible this whole episode was simply set up to give Severian a look at, at a future in which he fails.
Mm.
Um, so that he has a greater understanding of the sort of the timescape and the nature of these things. So did Severian change things by taking him down from the tower? Yeah, probably. Or Severian was always on a path to ensure that his future did not happen, and so Master Ash was sort of doomed. Period. By coming back to our time, maybe because maybe his future exists in like a parallel future state or something like that. But by coming back to our time, and putting himself in this position, he destroyed himself. Like I don't know, right? It's totally possible. As Severi notes, it's also possible that they might have info from the Cumian, who is also a Hyrule, right? So there's lots of ways this information could have gotten there. I don't think broadly it matters that much,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a question sort of worth asking.
I was captivated during that section, like the
It is
whole
so cool.
never left the house because I don't know what'll happen, like that whole thing, and then obviously he blinks out of existence, and like the whole thing I thought was very very cool, and seeing the future state of Earth if the sun does burn out as it may, I thought that was all very very well done. I just was not
It's
100% sure what was going on, so
It's super cool. Well, that's the right way to read this the first time. It's just like sort of like sink into it and just like I don't know, man. It has a certain trippy quality to it sometimes,
yeah.
and the best thing to do is just sort of let it happen. But it is so cool. Just the fact too that the higher you climb the tower, the further away from time you come to is like that's neat, right? It's just cool.
Mm,
Everywhere you turn in any of these books, it's just idea, 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 idea. This goes back to that like no wasted words thing.
mhm.
But no, like we can probably suspect that this ship is of Hyrule manufacture. It works like the gardens in Ness's work, which you'll remember those are built by Father Iniri, who is also a Hyrule, right? So I think it's reasonable to expect. So
Liam is, of course, highlighting my ignorance here because I have no idea about Ash from Germanic myth. Are you familiar?
Liam knows that I'm a tomato Europe guy, not a potato Europe guy. Ironically, both of those are foods not native to Europe, but you get the idea. I am not super up on that story either, Liam. So
Okay.
if Liam wants to illuminate us, I would be glad. But there is certainly a lot of Germanic Nordic stuff here. I mean, the fact that the planet is named Earth, right, with a U, is one of the Norns, and Venus and Mars have been renamed to be the other Norns. Um, you know, um, that's the whole thing. But
Paramita's got an interesting question here. Do you feel that Earth is superior on its own, or was it or I think she's saying is the story superior on its own, or was Earth essential?
I don't know that Earth was essential. I think Gene was probably right from like a design standpoint. Obviously, like he knows what he's doing. We don't need it, but but on the other hand, Earth is awesome, and I think that spelling it out probably helped a lot more readers than it hurt. And all the stuff that's in Earth is just very cool to actually leave and go to Yasod and do the whole conciliator thing, and it's my favorite of the 5, Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of how weird it is, and
Yep.
I think all of my favorite moments really are in Earth if they're not in Sword. So I think Earth is essential from like a reading experience just
Mm-hmm.
because it's so good. But from a like design standpoint, it is not a necessary part of the Book of the New Sun mechanism, I think.
Yep. And then Severian here, yeah, I do think there is some kind of creation myth involving a first man and woman, similar to what we saw in the play. I think so. Maybe that's what this was alluding to.
Yeah, another sort of Adam and Eve situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's distinctly possible. This is again, that's a little outside my area.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it is that is also totally possible. So
Cool.
nobody is named casually, and it's worth noting that like I don't believe there is a Saint Ash, right? So Master Ash has something different about him, right? He's not a normal human. There's something going on there. Um, but yeah, so that's basically that. I think again, I do not claim to be the sort of like be all end all of like wolf experts. That's Mark Armini, and Michelangelo Giusi. That's not me.
Yeah,
But but I at least understand what the house is, so
for
I got
sure. I appreciate it. All right, so now we meet some, I guess we'd call them old friends. I think that Severian is sort of bailed out by, if I remember the sequence correctly, by Agia and by Hethor and his beasts. Is that correct? They take out the Askians. Am I wrong on?
I think that's right. I thought doesn't he go to war properly first?
I think
Uh,
so. Yeah.
I believe doesn't he has a whole bit with what's his name? The cavalryman. He joins the cavalry and like has to like fight for his place in the band, and then they go to
Yeah.
war for a bit. Because is it not that the Agia and Hethor rescue him from the Autarch ship?
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Or is there an earlier episode? I forget. As I said, it's been about a year for me
Yeah,
since I read this, and it has been a long year.
for sure.
I didn't have a third reread in me so close together, but
I guess the key thing is I wasn't surprised to see Agia at this point.
oh no, right, no, and she's thrown in with Vodalis, right, and
And ends up overthrowing him,
like
correctly?
killing him,
Killing him?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a whole thing. But no, she really is like Team Rocket, right? Like she just shows up like over and over and over again, and like or she and Heather, I guess, are Team Rocket. And and I guess the beasts are Meowth.
Mhm.
But anyway, this was all intentional on Gene's part. It was a
For sure.
Pokemon reference. But no,
That's why I didn't understand it, but I just nodded along like I did. So that's
yeah,
good.
no. Anyway, Sorry.
No, you're good.
Moment. But anyway, no. So they totally they do come back again. They play a big role in the final, or really, I guess, the penultimate act of this whole thing, because they are involved in rescuing Severian, right? Because he meets up with the Autarch, right? And the Autarch sends out this message basically saying, "Hey, the Autarch is on the ship." He sends the message as the Votalis is spy in the Autarch's court, right?
Yeah.
And they come to get the Autarch, and Severian's the only guy there, right? Of course, and the person they know is the spy, right? So they don't really, they assume it must be Severian, basically, because it couldn't be the other guy at first, right? Like, it's kind of blurry, and but Guasoct, that's the name of the soldier. Just came in.
That's the chapter name too. Yeah, that's right. Guasoct. Yeah.
Guasoct. Yeah. That's the cavalryman. So he straight up joins the Autarch's military, right? Goes to war. It does not go great, but Severian sort of rises through the ranks and gets distinguished, as a warrior, in all of this, and eventually, like, meets the Autarch again, right? Who is this sort of eunuch fellow, and they go up in an airship, and Severian becomes the Autarch, right? He,
drinks the Alzabo potion and eats his brain and does all the fun stuff.
Right. It is explained to him that the Autarchs, right, are so called. They are not monarchs because actually the person who is alive has to rule over the previous lives of all the other Autarchs within him, right? So there's like a fancier version of the Alzabo potion. Like, you have to eat the brain specifically, but if you do that, and take this stuff, you can have all the lives of the previous Autarchs floating around your head. Mostly the previous one, but like the other ones are like hidden behind him. And this is where we start to get into like the big sort of meta plot here, because he is confronted a little bit after the Votalis episode with the Hyrule again, in the form of another emanation of Master Malrubius, and they explain basically that, like, who we is the Deus Ex Machina, right? We are powers above the stage, which is where the Mechane that would like lower the Deus was, right? And we are, making sure that you get where you need to be. Because what needs to happen is he needs to become the Autarch, and the Autarch needs to stand basically as proxy for humanity, so that humanity can be judged basically by God, and found, worthy or not. And all the previous Autarchs either did not manage to get tried at all or failed. The previous Autarch failed, and that's what made him a eunuch.
Right.
And he was somehow sort of incomplete in this way. And this is really interesting, because this is something that's sort of similar in a lot of ways to the Kwisatz Haderach and Dune. Both
got some Dune vibes throughout this whole thing, like the past lives and all that kind of stuff.
But symbolically, like, it's really like Dune in like a sort of metatextual level, because I remember there was an article on Tor.com a couple years ago. I think it was the last article I ever read on Tor.com, where the person who was writing this was very upset that the Kwisatz Haderach had to be a man, right? And why is that the case? Like, he should become some sort of androgyne, right? And I was thinking about Book of the New Sun, because becoming an androgyne is the punishment for failure to become the new sun, right? There's something sort of insufficient or incomplete in the previous Autarch that caused him to be returned to Earth without the ability to generate future offspring, right? Which is obviously very symbolic, right? He is a dead end. He's an evolutionary dead end. He's a symbolic dead end. He did his best. The old Autarch is like, he's no slouch, right? Like, he's managed to hold the Askians and his own court off, and he's literally just a beekeeper, but like, he was incomplete, insufficient in some way. Severian, on the other hand, right, isn't actually just a man, right? Severian pointedly is a man and a woman in a man's body, right? He has Thecla there, so in sort of an alchemical sense, he's what the alchemists call a rapus, right? A sort of spiritually complete masculine-feminine union. That's what the Kwisatz Haderach is, right? The Kwisatz Haderach is a is a man who is able to like keep his sort of feminine aspect in proportion, right? And so he is sort of spiritually complete in a way, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
lets. Now, how scientifically you explain how the Kwisatz Haderach power, I don't care, right?
Yeah.
But like the idea is that he is some sort of spiritually complete person in a way that Severian actually is, by dint of his suffering, like this horrible like journey that he's been through. He is more complete, right? And he's more than one person. And so he is able, and I think it is the fact that he has a Thekla in him, right? Among other things, that that makes him the person who is able to stand for all of humanity at the end of time. Like he is in the judgment that happens obviously in Earth. Like that's what Earth is about, is the actual judgment, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is like that had to be sort of planned for, right? As Severian himself here is saying, his life is like really staged, and he still had to make he had to make these choices, which I think, to answer Severian's question, is broadly sort of reflective of Wolff's Catholicism, right? People have free will, but obviously, but God is in control, right? So how do you like square those things? And the answer is
Mm-hmm.
like there are like millions of words of theology on this subject, and we're not going to cover this in a stream. But these things are seemingly contradictory in a certain way, right? But you ultimately do have to make that choice, right? Because and this is reflective in the gospel stories too, right? And Severian broadly is a Christ-like figure, right?
Right.
He is a person who has to suffer and sacrifice himself for the redemption of mankind, right?
Yep.
Is he literally Jesus of Nazareth? No,
Right.
but there's a lot of sort of metaphysical overlap here. And so I think the point here basically is that you have to choose, you have to choose right. You have to choose, grace, right? Grace is not, compulsory. You can in fact choose to go to hell. God does not send anyone there. You send yourself, right? And so you have that free will, but at the same time, the sort of cosmic story, right, is going to end in a victory for good in some way, right? Whether or not humanity is saved in the process, right, as a species, right, is sort of a separate issue. But like everything in a cosmic sense is going to be okay. The
Yep.
Increate is still in charge, and I think that is sort of, we see that reflected down in this structure here, where the Hyrule, who are angels, right? We see one in book 2. If you remember, Sarian opens that book and he sees
Mm-hmm.
this beautiful woman with wings flying through space, and then he like bleeds from his forehead, right?
Yep.
In a way that kind of it imitates the garden, right, when Jesus sweats blood, right?
Yep.
And so they are literally angels, right? And so they are pushing the pieces around, right? The
Mm-hmm.
Autarch has been, having failed at his task, he has taken on the task of being sort of in a sense a John the Baptist to Severian's Christ, right? So this whole thing has been set up. That's why the Autarch was monitoring the brothel in Nessus, right? Like they knew that was going to be the brothel this guy was going to come to. And when we
Mm-hmm.
get a little further into, we know that like Severian is also the product of like some really specific, it's almost like there's a breeding program, right, in like a Dune sense too, right?
Yep.
Because like there's a serious question of whether or not his mother like is the person who plays Catherine, who shows up at the sort of the ceremony for the guild, every year, and who's always the same person every year, right? There's some intimation of that, right? But like he manages to encounter his grandparents, right? One more closely than the other, but like all these things like feel very planned, right?
Sure.
And as they all say to him, right? Like we have been manipulating things from above the stage, right? Which is reflexive of this higher, I think, sort of divine cosmic order. These things are meant to happen, but at the same time, Severian could still not be what he needed to be. He could have made a lot of choices that he'd made. Now, obviously, he's not perfect, and the fact that he's so not perfect, I think, should be, I think, a comfort to us, right, as readers, that you can
Yep.
still be a complete disaster and serve good in some way. He's kind of Gollum in this respect. to an extent too, right? Also two people, right? Which is interesting. But
yeah, I think you contextualize that well for me, the whole invisible hand and above the stage and stuff, because I sort of understood that when I was reading it, but not completely. And now thinking back through the prior three books, I can feel that happening at various stages where he's happens to be in the right place at the right time, happens to be talking to exactly the right person he needs to talk to. So that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
I wanted to ask, and I think you've covered it before, but I still don't completely understand. So, why is the Autarch against expansion into the stars? Is it because that's what's damaging the sun, or is there a different reason entirely?
That is a good question. I think it's because, and I think it's a symbolic reason. I think it is because it's representative of the sort of it's representative of the sort of sense of like worldly conquest, right? It's a fundamentally like Babylonian project in the sense like it's like Babel building. It's
Okay.
To build these big cosmic empires is to like try to become like God, right? It's to like try to reach God. That's why Typhon, right, who is basically Satan, right, is the person who's trying to recapture this. He was the last person to like try and settle the galaxy, right, and to take mankind outward. And this is he is manifestly Luciferian, right? I think the basic premise here is that like everything sort of needs to be in its proper place and in proportion, and that really man's sort of battle is to master himself and not to master the universe, and to be in his proper place and in the proper relationship with divinity, with the increate, and with the natural order. And for failing to do that, for engaging in this sort of Babylonian project, right? Humanity brought trouble down on themselves. Now, was it like Erebus or Abaya, like a Predatoria, like space monster that put the worm in the sun? Unclear, right? Could have been the angels themselves as a kind of punishment. In the sense, it doesn't really matter, of course, because like angels and demons, both in their way, ultimately end up serving, God's purpose, because God is in control, right? So. Basically, I think the thing is just that sort of imperial project is looking the wrong way. It's pointed in the wrong direction, and so I think that's what that's about. It's about trying to make humanity better. And this is reflected too in sort of the bigger cosmic stuff, right? Because this has all happened before, right? The universe has turned over and been through this cycle of sort of refinement and improvement over and over again, and will continue to go through this cycle. Even if the new sun comes, there's going to be the next world. So
Got it. Okay, that's cool. All right. Well, you alluded to it earlier, but his grandmother being Dorcas. So, one, that's pretty gross. Unintentionally, that he had sex with his own grandmother. But I guess I'm struggling to understand. Is that just an Easter egg, or is that relevant in some? I read that I don't know what I'm supposed to take out of that.
Well, I don't understand. I don't know why they have to have relations precisely, right? But the fact that he has stumbled through all this stuff does certainly at least touch on the sort of planned nature of his life, right? And it is also like it is like his whole dalliance with Dorcas is like a wrong turn, right? It is something he does wrongly, and in a sense, maybe symbolically, you can make an argument that like by literally going back to the past, right, by climbing up his own family tree, so to speak, he like this is the wrong way. This is not the way forward. Because he's constantly seeing himself through the prism of his relationship with these women, and will continue to, right? And they all mean different things. I think broadly, Dorcas, represents this past for him, and the past is something that can't be recaptured. This is Typhon's problem. You know, and so I do think there is a lot of symbolic resonance there. I might be missing some big part of the point.
Okay.
It's also been a minute, but I do think that in this relationship we see this sort of return backwards, right? And we also see um uh gosh, it just left me. But we also see this planned nature of Severian's life sort of rearticulated in another way.
Okay.
Uh,
Fair. Um, cool. Now we're getting to the part where I've been looking forward to talking to you about this for a long time since I first read it. And I've read theories, I've read the companion book about it, and I don't really understand. I am not the first Severian, or however he phrases it. So I read the companion book that I'm reading, and there's like a whole section about this. And it seems to indicate that there was an earlier Severian that went through some of these same trials and tribulations and then is now sort of helping our Severian, I guess, for lack of a better word, through the events more correctly. So is this like a Biff in Back to the Future 2 helping himself? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, no, I think that's basically it, right? That there is a little bit of sort of time looping. You see that, I mean, it is certainly there are a few different ways we can take this, right? Because he's obviously the conciliator, right? Which means he does go to the past, right? Which means that in a certain way he paves the way for himself,
Okay.
right? So there is, in a sense, that he's not the first Severian because actually later on he will be an earlier Severian, right? So there is this level. There is also a sense in which the universe like repeats cyclically, right? The universe sort of expands, contracts, and in each cycle there's something like the story that gets played out. So I think those are sort of the sort of two things in contention here. Really. But yeah, I do think in the first sense there's kind of a Biff thing. It's not like, really, I don't know that there's necessarily like another another Severian like hiding like just off stage, like,
Sure.
literally like Biff, but he did sort of pave the way for himself.
Okay.
So and like maybe I'm wrong too, right? Maybe the Biff stuff is going on and I just am too stupid to have noticed it myself. But certainly he does go back and sort of lay the template for this entire thing to happen by founding the religion inadvertently in the first place, right? Because there is the Book of the New Sun like in the library, right? When he goes there, like this is already the sacred text, right? It exists as religious background in the world. It must, because Dr. Talos riffs on it for the play, and they don't realize that it's the story they're all living in like right now. It's all sort of literally true, which is sort of but sorry, I'm looking at the comments, and then my computer went dark again. What is going on? This is so weird. It does not do that usually during streams. Anyway, man, the computer just vexed me. Part where he goes, I'm the shadow torturer. Yeah. But there's a question here I wanted to get to too.
Brent's question.
Yeah. Oh, that was
Nature of
what
the
that
claw?
there was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is the claw real or not? Yes. To both, right? No, the claw originally is just a regular old little thorn, right? And because of Severian's contact with it and his sort of seeing it as important, it becomes important. Does it have powers in and of itself? Only to the extent maybe that Severian's blood on the claw has power in and of itself. The power is in Severian. Severian is and always has been the new sun. Like that was from the beginning. He's had the power in him. He brought Triskele back from the dead before he even had seen the claw.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So maybe it's a StreamYard thing. Okay, Liam's saying he had the same problem with the computer. Interesting. But no, so the claw is not magical in itself. It is Severian who has the ability. And that
Is
ability was imbued. It will be imbued in him. He does not actually. It hasn't been given to him yet, but it goes sort of backwards through time. So he's always had it as consequence.
Is it what a wizard's wand or staff would be? Like I pick it up and I can't do anything with it, but it's like a point of focus for like it's a talisman because he's using it. It helps him to focus what he's doing.
Broadly, like, yes, right? Like, he learns to use his powers because he thinks this other thing has power, right? Yes. But it also becomes a relic because it's important, right? Because he believes it was important, and
Right.
because he becomes important, it becomes this symbol of him, right? So it was nothing, but he sacralizes it. He makes it sacred
Sure.
by his belief in it and his use of it. So,
But when he's trying to give it to the Pellerines, if they tried to use it, nothing would happen,
right,
presumably.
right. Maybe it works miracles spontaneously, like, just because of what it is. Maybe there's some residual power in a sense left in it, but yeah, you couldn't use it the way that he was using it, with his own will and stuff. Um, and this is something I think Earth makes super, super explicit.
Okay. Okay.
Too. So you'll get this sort of spelled out a little bit more. But no, it is just a regular thorn. So
And I think Earth is like the size of the other four combined or something, right? Isn't it?
it's
Pretty
not quite
chunky?
that big. It's like maybe two of them together.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it's longer. It's got, I think each of them have about like 35 chapters, and I think Earth's got like 52.
Oh, okay.
It's a good bit longer, but it's not, it's not like, Sanderson sized or something.
Yeah.
Um,
I need to rip through some GGK, and then once I get that done, it'll be time. So, yeah, I'm excited for that.
awesome.
All right. Well, I think I'm in better shape now.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I gotta confess, I not on my A game today. As everyone is mentioned at the top, right? I have a kid coming in a couple weeks, so it could be any day. And so I not have time to get back up on everything, do my homework for this one.
oh, this is a question by Canis here. If we can grab this real
Yeah,
quick.
sure.
In regards to the symbols, which ones do you think Severian, even before which one do you think shaped Severian even before he knew what they were?
Well, I think I think all of them really do in a sense, right? So there's the claw, obviously, right, which is also associated with the rose bush, right? So
Mhm.
which is also on the tomb, right? You'll remember in the necropolis because it is his tomb,
Yep.
in a sense, and literally it is his tomb, and so one of them at least, but so there's that symbol there, and so that's always been sort of, he's always been, he's attracted to it, and it casts a sufficient shadow, right? There's Vodalus's coin, right,
Yep.
which is the symbol he talks about in that passage, right, as shaping his sort of identity.
Yep.
By giving him that coin, he believed himself a soldier of Vodalus, in this sort of romantic fantasy. And so there's the symbols of his guild in the first place, right? He would swear by it. Yeah, well, it was a rose bush, right, that has the thorn on it. And you gotta really, watch out for plant and animal symbolism in these books, right? Because particularly as it relates to things like we're talking about, the like masculine and feminine, right? Because Gene Wolfe, right, animal name, his wife was Rosemary, plant name, and
Hmm.
so frequently, like, you'll see this, you read Book of the Long Sun, all of
Hmm.
the men who live on the Whirl, the ship, have animal or animal product names, and all of the women have plant or plant product names.
That's awesome.
Uh, yeah. So
I'm looking forward to that. That's gonna be a trip.
it's super cool. But it is reflexive of their relationship. So there is something of that in the sort of plant symbolism with the thorn to being conflated with the claw of an animal, right? And the fact that that's both things is sort of makes it a symbol of Severian as this spiritually complete, Rabus kind of masculine, feminine being. So that's a symbol, uh, you know, and of course there's blood, uh, as well, right? But there's also the habits of the guild deeply inform how he carries himself, right? By simply getting the cloak, like, like, this if you ever worn a uniform, right? Like, wearing the
Mhm.
uniform right? Especially if it's an impressive uniform, impresses upon you, right, the responsibilities and the behaviors associated with that uniform.
Exactly.
You graduate police academy, like you will never feel more like a police officer than the day that you graduate, right?
Yeah.
Putting on the uniform means something. I wore uniform to school for the first like 10 years of my life, right? And that was good, right? It's it made you feel like a student, and it made you focus on being a student instead of like, are my clothes good enough? Am I being bullied for my weird sweatshirt, right?
Yeah.
Like uniforms matter. So all of that stuff deeply, deeply impinges itself on Severian and like informs a lot of his like, oh, I'm a torturer, right? So like I think he's deeply aware of the impact these things have on him. So yeah.
Great question, great answer.
Yeah. Oh, and of course Terminus Est is part of this, right? So
I miss Terminus Est.
it's so cool. Yeah.
I'm still upset, but that's okay.
Never to be duplicated. He literally gets a ray gun in this one, and you like didn't even remember he had a ray gun. You're just like, I just want the sword. So no. But yeah, no, that was a good question. And as Severian here said, Silk for Calde. We'll get there. So
Sounds good. Well, I know you are a very busy man. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk this through with me. And at some point, when things slow down a little bit for you, hopefully we can get together and discuss Earth a little bit.
Totally. That would be awesome.
Brushing up on that. So I look forward to that. And as always, my friend and my friends, publication order always.
We'll see you soon.
Bye, all.
Thanks for having me.